So we've been going through this series on the life of Solomon and the lessons that we learned from him, and we're now to the point of, there it is. Wow. Okay, we're in the book of Ecclesiastes, and this is what I'm calling Solomon's magnum opus. This is his great work, right? The result of his life and all the wisdom that God gave him and all the foolish choices that he made and the lessons learned from it. And last week we looked at the opening two chapters of the book of Ecclesiastes, which was Solomon's cry of futility in his attempts to find satisfaction and fulfillment without God. And where we left off last week was at the end of chapter 2, and I'll tell you right off the bat, I did you a little bit of a disservice last week. You may remember I ended with, it was a real downer, right? Because this is what we ended with last week at the end of Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 24. There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw from the hand of God. And I kind of left it there. It's like, what more? That's all there is. You might as well enjoy what you have while you have it, because when it's gone, and you're done. What a downer, right? But that was the perspective that Solomon had through chapters 1 and 2. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. Life is pointless. Existentialism leads to despair and loss, and you might as well go goth and just enjoy it, right? I mean, that's kind of what he was. But that actually isn't the end of what he said in chapter 2. He actually did give a little bit of a note of hope. And what we find as we look at verses 24 and 25 together is he actually identifies two ways to live in this. And I outlined the verses in this way to show the two ways to live. He said there is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For, and then one way of living, apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? Good question, right? He says that's not possible. But then the other option, for to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. Back to the first way of living. But to the sinner, he has given the business of gathering and collecting. The other side, only to give to the one who pleases God. You see the emptiness and despair of the life without God, and the fulfillment and blessing, the joy of the life with God, the person who pleases God. There's his note of hope. He says, after all of this, I finally see there are two ways to live. There are two options. I don't have to live in this existential despair and despondency. There is another option. And that's the lead-in to chapter 3. And in chapter 3, he starts to identify some deeper truths about life. He had already talked about some of the things. He said, well, I experimented. I thought, well, maybe I can find fulfillment through seeking pleasure. Oh, that was empty. Maybe I can find fulfillment through seeking wealth. That was empty. Maybe I can find fulfillment through seeking power and fame. And no, that was empty too. Maybe I can, all of these things, he said, it all led to emptiness. So he had already identified a number of things in life. And he said, I looked in science, and I looked in building projects, and I looked in all of these different areas, and in everything without God, it was empty. It was futile. But now in chapter 3, he takes another look at those same things. And he finds some deeper truths. And what he finds is that God will use everything for his purposes. And that there is a proper time and purpose for everything. And even as you start hearing these phrases, if you're like me, your brain goes to this very famous folk song from years gone by that is based on these very verses. It was written by Pete Seeger in 1959, and it became a number 1 hit by the Byrds in 1965. Turn, turn, turn. Is it going through your head? Every season, turn, turn. Right? Right? So, though the lyrics were taken nearly verbatim from this passage, the underlying message of the song was a protest against war, which it was interesting. I read an article that detailed what Pete Seeger said about this song. It was written because his producer came to him and said, Pete, you need to write a song that's not a protest song. He says, that's what I do, man. That's just what I do. He said, but you need to write a song that's more subtle and feeling. And so he starts flipping through his notebook of just things that he had written over the years, and he came across this snippet from the Bible. And he said, I thought about it. And I said, here's this bearded man with sandals. And he's talking about all these things, and he's protesting. And he said, I'm going to write a protest song that doesn't feel like a protest song. That's basically what he said. And anyway, but he missed the point that Solomon was giving. Let's take a look at what Solomon actually said. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to cast away. A time to tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. As you look at that list of things, what do you see in that list? What are some thoughts? If you would encapsulate the whole thing for me in a statement. Cheryl. Life. Yeah, I mean, we see every part of life in this, right? Okay, anything else? What else do you see? There are alternatives in this. What else? There's order, discernment. You guys are pretty good. Anything else? Oh, there are all sorts of circumstances you cannot control. So stop trying, right? Not stop trying in life, but stop trying to control those things that you cannot control. All right? Anything else? I'm going to go back to Cam's comment about alternatives. Not only are they alternatives, but they are contrasts. Time to born, time to die, time to plant, time to harvest, time to kill, time to heal, break down, build up, weep, laugh, mourn, dance. They're all contrasts, negative and positive, right? And so that's one of the things that as Solomon is re-examining all of these things, and the other thing that I see in this, I see cycles. There's a continual cycle in these things. The cycle of the seasons, planting and harvesting, the cycle of life, birth and death, And he said, wow, this is all a part of this thing that we call life that we don't have control over, that we have to learn how to choose these alternatives, how to view these things, because they are all part of a process. And in that, he says, for everything there is a season. There is a time for every matter. Oh, there are positives and negatives, and just because it's negative doesn't mean it's wrong. It has a purpose if you recognize it. They address the start and end of many processes, the necessary cycles of renewal, weeping and laughing, mourning and dancing. And you know, in some of these things, you notice how, I mean, if you go back to the beginning, time to be born, a time to die, is like, okay, boy, that's going from joy and hope to loss and despair, and yet down below, it's like, well, kill and then heal, break down and then build up, weep and then laugh, mourn and then dance. You notice how he said, oh, there's hope that comes after the loss. There's a renewal that comes after the negative. He's starting to see that this is a part of a process. And some of the touch points that we see in this list may make us uneasy when we're in them. But we also recognize that they are valid and essential as a cycle or a process in order to complete the process. And Solomon asked the question after he wrote this list. He said, what is the gain? What is the profit? What gain has the worker from his toil? If I'm just looking at this list and I see positive and negative, and by the way, if you go back at the list, you notice there's an even number of positives and negatives in that list. And if all you're doing is doing like an accountant and trying to do the balance sheet, positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, you end up with a null. It's like there's no gain. Everything is neutralized. And if my purpose in life is gain, then this is an empty, miserable cycle. That's the way many people look at life. If the net result of all that I do, all that I experience is just neutral, what good is that? I haven't gained anything, because we're always supposed to gain, whether we're talking money or learning or whatever. We're always focused on gain. And he said, so what profit is there? I haven't gained anything if that's my purpose. But that got him to thinking, well, maybe there's more to life than gain. Maybe it's not really about the positives outweighing the negatives. Maybe there's a purpose in how the positives and the negatives work with each other for a deeper meaning, a deeper purpose. And so after pondering those things, the wisest man who ever lived came to some vital conclusions that start in verses 10 and 11. And he says here, I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Solomon said that not everything in this list may be good in itself, but everything in the list has a good and appropriate time and purpose in God's plan. What do you see that's new in this from the book of Ecclesiastes, what we've seen so far? Positive outlook, but why is there a positive outlook? God is finally a part of the equation. Remember in chapters 1 and 2, under the sun, under the sun, under the sun. Without God. Now he's saying, this is a business that God has given. God is in control. God has determined these things exist. God has placed them in my life, and He has made everything beautiful in its time. For the first time in this book, he's looking above the sun instead of under the sun. Where it says he has made everything beautiful in its time, depending on your translation of the Bible, you may have perfect or acceptable or good. It's like it's not just that it is, like pleasing to the eyes, but there is a, dare I go back to his previous word, profit? There is a profitable purpose in everything from God's perspective. He's recognizing that these are not simply positives and negatives on an accounting ledger, but they are parts of a full cycle of life that God created for us to accomplish something more. And really what he's saying in this is like pieces of a puzzle. They fit into the complete picture that God is crafting in our lives. His intention of bringing us to maturity, to the person that He created us to be in right relationship with Him. But notice he said, in His time, or in its time, right? God's timing is the key to finding that beauty. And so we need to be patient. We need to trust Him to fit the pieces together. He's the one building the life, not us. We're living the life. And we're trusting Him to do what is right. And so, as we think of that, okay, God is going to take everything that's in that list, and He's going to craft them together to create this beautiful puzzle. The picture that when I look at just the individual piece, death or sorrow or war or tearing down, it's like, that's not good. But when you see that dark piece of the puzzle put in with everything else, you see where it starts creating the beautiful picture that God intended. And in fact, we find this exact same concept in the New Testament, a verse that probably many of you could quote from memory, Romans 8:28. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to His purpose. Notice he doesn't say that all things are good. All things work together for good. Yes, all things have a good purpose, but the experience of everything, every piece, is not necessarily good. But God will work it for good. The net result will be good, even from the negative. And so we're told to trust God's timing and God's process in all of these things. And you notice that both Solomon and Paul identify that the good in all of these things, or in these processes, is for those who choose the second way of living, that of loving and pleasing God. He works them together for good for those who are called according to His purpose. Those that have said, I choose the God way, not the without God way. But then the second conclusion that Solomon came to is found in the second half of verse 11, where he says, also He has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. Solomon recognized that man was created for more than just this brief span of life on this earth. We were created for an eternal existence. In every culture, in every religion, man has sought to find answers to life beyond what we can see. Isn't that what the purpose of religions are? It's, I got to find meaning to life. Isn't that the reason of philosophy? I got to find the meaning of life. Every culture, every language, every religion, got to find meaning. God created us with that desire, that void of find out the purpose, find the purpose of the Creator. But as we think about that God created us with that desire, but we're also limited in our ability to look into those things. Solomon said he put eternity into our heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to end. There are mysteries that God has not revealed. There are other things that God has revealed. Interesting thing as we think about this whole context of realizing that we were created for eternity, realizing that there is a spiritual and eternal aspect to our existence. Do you realize animals don't have that? They are just in the moment. They just do what they do. They don't ponder, I wonder, what about? They don't. That's a unique thing that God put within the heart of man. It sets us apart from the animals. Only mankind has that eternal spiritual aspect. But even though we have that internal need and desire to look into those things, as I said, we're limited in our ability, and because of that, we're told in the Bible, we walk by faith, not by sight. God calls us to trust Him, even when we can't see or understand what He's doing, why He's doing it, how He's doing it. We go back to his first point, that we have to remember that God makes all things beautiful in His time. We make plans, we have hopes for tomorrow, and when God's timing does not match up with our timing, what happens? We struggle. We get disappointed. But I thought... Yeah, we're not in control. We have to recognize that God is in control. There's a poem that is often attributed to Corrie ten Boom. She quoted it often as she would speak to audiences. For those that aren't familiar with Corrie ten Boom, she is a Holocaust survivor. She was in one of the German concentration camps in World War II. Many of her family members died in that, but she survived. And she spent the rest of her life telling the story of, first, how her family had harbored Jews in Holland, in their home, escaping from the Nazis until they were caught and then imprisoned. She told the story of that, but within all of that, she also told the story of how God, just like Solomon learned, God was using even the hard things, the negative things, to accomplish His greater purposes for good. She often would tell a story about while she was in the concentration camp and just all of the horrors that they were having to live through there. One of the things that they dealt with, that they wondered, why God? Why us? They had horrible lice problems in their barracks. And lice are not comfortable. And they were like, on top of everything else, God, why this? And then they discovered something. Because of the lice in their barracks, the guards never came in. And because the guards never came in, they had freedom to study the Bible under the noses of the guards. And so they began thanking God for the lice because they saw God's purpose. They saw the process of what God was doing. There were many of her fellow prisoners who came into that concentration camp hating God because they felt that God had forgotten them and God had, put them in that place, in that horrible circumstance. And Corrie was able to point out to them, yes, God did that, but so that you could learn of his love and put your faith in him. Well, this poem that I was mentioning that she often quoted is called Life is But a Weaving. And it gives a beautiful insight into this puzzle of the positives and the negatives, the good things and the bad things that are all, every one, beautiful in his time, according to his plan. And so the poem says, my life is but a weaving between my God and me. I cannot choose the colors. He weaveth steadily. Oft times he weaveth sorrow, and I in foolish pride forget he sees the upper, and I the underside. Not till the loom is silent and the shuttles cease to fly will God unroll the canvas and reveal the reason why. The dark threads are as needful in the weaver's skillful hand as the threads of gold and silver in the pattern he has planned. He knows, he loves, he cares. Nothing this truth can dim. He gives the very best to those who leave the choice to him. She learned that through hard experience. Solomon learned it through hard experience. You ever look at the back side of a tapestry? I mean, we've got a picture of it here. You've got all these crisscrossing lines and knots and strings and whatever, and you'd be hard-pressed to know what that picture is. But if you flip it over and then you see, oh, this is the beautiful picture. This is how all these things work together. See, while we are here on this earth, under the sun, we can't see the finished picture. God's the weaver. He's the one looking at the top. Oh, this is the net result. This is the end of the process of what I am doing. And we're told, we find this as we look at other scriptures that talk about the suffering that we endure, the trials that we face in this life, that God tells us that he is bringing us to maturity, bringing us further into the image of Christ through these things, teaching us how to rely on him, rest in him, how to see his strength in our weakness, seeing how he uses us to minister to others in so many different aspects. To everything, there is a season and a purpose. God makes everything beautiful in his time, in his way, when we recognize his purpose. One last note we find from Solomon's contemplations here at the first half of Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 12 and 13. Solomon says this, I perceived that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all this toil, in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. I want to point out something in that. He talks here about everyone eating and drinking and taking pleasure in all his toil. This is not the same as what he said in the previous chapters of eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. It's not the same. Now he's saying, wow, we need to find joy. We need to find that in this daily toil of everything that God has given us, there is joy to be found. It is all a gift from God. Do you realize that when you look back at the Garden of Eden, and so often we think about, well, yeah, it was at the Garden of Eden that God told man that in the sweat of your brow, you're going to labor in the soil, and there will be, thorns and sorrow and everything else. And we're like, yeah, see, work is part of the curse. But is it really? God gave Adam a job to tend and keep the garden before the curse ever came in. From the very beginning, God's intention was that the work that he gave man to do was to be a fulfilling, joyful thing. The sorrow and toil came as a result of sin. But that was not God's original design. God's original plan for man was good, intending for us to enjoy the life that he gave to us. And so the daily tasks of life, even as we are living in a world that is under the curse, there's still joy to be found in those daily tasks. Work is not a punishment. It's a fulfilling task from a loving Creator. And if we recognize that our very existence and the work that we have to do, whatever it may be, is all a gift from God, we will be on the path toward finding fulfillment and joy from all that he gives to us. And living the lesson, he makes all things beautiful in his time. We may not enjoy every single step. We may not enjoy every single experience, but we'll see God has a purpose. And I can trust him to bring me through the tunnel, bring me back into the light. That he'll use that negative thing for a positive experience in my life or in someone else's life, to where there truly is joy and blessing to be found in all parts of that puzzle of life that God has placed us in. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your amazing plan. That you, in your love and grace and mercy, are able to take the most horrible things and use them for good. Lord, help us to trust in you. Help us to see all of these things as a result of your love, your care for us. That you will use them to bring honor and glory to you, to grow us in our faith, to help us minister to others, so that together we can worship and glorify you, celebrating your goodness and love. Lord, help us to see that to everything there is truly a purpose. That when seen from your perspective, the end result is a beautiful thing. Lord, give us the patience to endure through and even find joy in the difficult times that you bring into our lives. We pray that you would strengthen our faith and help us be a support and a help to others as they trust in you as well. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.